It all begins in a dark place where the sound of footsteps echoes. Then we see the face of a young man. He looks exhausted yet determined on his journey. Before him is a sword that glows brightly with the heat of a furnace. With a look full of fury, he prepares for what must be done. He opens his mouth to bite the blade, which shatters into several pieces from the bite. A memory comes to mind, and he recalls a story his father used to tell him as a child. The elder says that although they have lived far from the capital for 200 years, the family's prestige was once unmatched. He mentions that his ancestors were righteous knights, favored by the king and revered by all. Furthermore, they were a family chosen by the sword, producing master swordsmen for many generations. Because of this fame, everyone called them by a specific name as a sign of great respect, and says that he will one day take charge of the caravan family. He tells the boy to live with pride, for the blood of steel runs through his veins. That family was known as the Invincible Guardians, the Caravans, and they needed to reclaim their former glory to once again become the protectors of that land. This becomes their family's mission to recover what was lost. Moving to the present, we see a beautiful sunny day in a wheat field. The protagonist reflects on the heroic stories his father told him in his childhood. However, he believes it was all just exaggerated tales and nothing more. He thinks it's common for fallen nobles to invent a glorious past to make themselves feel better. If the stories of the caravans were true, they wouldn't be governing a remote village. And they certainly wouldn't spend their days farming the land alongside commoners. Despite his doubts, he continues to work on the harvest with the other villagers. Wiping away sweat, he realizes his father's stories have many holes and don't make sense. As an example, he points to the portrait of the family's founder hanging on the wall at home. No matter how much he looks, the young man sees no resemblance between the ancestor and his current family. Even the sword, a family heirloom, seems too well preserved for something so old. But most importantly, in all the kingdom's history books, there isn't a single mention of them. The name of his ancestor, Liam Caravan, cannot be found on any page. With this in mind, he concludes that it's all a lie to give the new generation a sense of pride. Suddenly, someone calls out to him, asking why he's just standing there so distracted. A villager then shouts that it's time for a snack, and if he isn't quick, the warm bread will be all gone. Hearing this, the protagonist runs toward them so he doesn't miss out on his share. With a smile, he thinks that it doesn't matter if his family wasn't great in the past. After all, he has all these people to welcome him with open arms. Besides, he loves this place where he can live peacefully alongside all of them. For the young man, this was a true caravan family he wanted for his life. But everything changes on a dark night where he is surrounded by fallen figures. Or at least that's what he thought in his complacency and illusory peace. Back in the present, he says he's going to the market in the next village since they've met the harvest goal. The young master plans to buy a few things they need there. He then asks a man named Kun if he wants some apples, since he had been complaining. And to a lady, he promises to look for a doll for her daughter's birthday. With a smile, he says he knows everything because he'll be the next lord of this place. Then the young man says goodbye to everyone and rides off on his horse as the villagers wave to him. With a big smile on his face, the young master Arhan sets off on his journey. As he rides away, the villagers comment that there's no one like the young master. Kun then calls everyone to finish the rest of the work before nightfall. But suddenly, a gash appears across his face as he speaks. Startled, one of the women watches the terrible scene, unable to believe what she's seeing. Red liquid splashes onto her face, leaving her in complete shock. Then she too is struck down. In an instant, the entire golden wheat field is stained red. Amid the chaos, a mysterious figure says that this territory must be eliminated. The survivors look at the invader with pure terror on their faces. Trembling with fear, one of the men gathers the courage to ask who the invader is. The mysterious warrior stands silently, observing the terrified villagers. In a cold voice, the man says again that this territory will be destroyed. Suddenly, he strikes down everyone around him. The invader then watches without any expression as the ground is stained red. With his mission accomplished, the mysterious man turns and leaves the area. Later that night, the gifts the protagonist bought fall to the ground. The apples and the doll he carried with such care are now scattered on the ground. With a heavy heart, the young master calls out for everyone but gets no answer. He then comes across the terrible scene and wonders why everyone is lifeless. A memory from the past comes to the young man's mind amidst his despair. His crying butler begged him not to look at that terrible scene. In the present, the butler hugs him as Arhan asks if it's really him. The young man questions if any of it is real, as it feels like just a horrible nightmare. With tears in his eyes, he mourns the loss of all the villagers. The butler then reveals with a trembling voice that the one responsible for everything has finally arrived. That man invaded the village, saying the caravan family needed to be erased. They say the entire attack lasted only 10 minutes, a true tragedy. Without any warning or sign, a mysterious man descended upon them with a cold blade. And in that short period of time, half of the villagers lost their lives. And with a single strike, the mysterious man destroys a large part of the village. Amidst the rubble, the warrior observes the destruction without showing any remorse. With a cold gaze, the white-haired man says he is just following orders. And that's how half of the caravans vanished in the blink of an eye. All that calamity was caused by a single sword master. The scene then changes to the caravan family mansion under the moonlight. Inside, they find a scene of horror with lifeless forms all over the floor. The young master stands in shock, unable to process what he sees. His face shows pure terror upon seeing his friends and family like that. Everyone he knew and loved was now lying lifeless on the floor. In complete despair, the young man begins to scream as his tears fall. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls his name amidst all the chaos. Looking up, he sees his mother running desperately toward him. She was the only fragment of hope left for the young boy. Relieved, his mother hugs him tightly, thankful that he is safe and sound. He then hugs her back tightly, feeling a bit of relief in that moment. The warmth of his mother's embrace brought him a fleeting sense of security. But in that instant, amidst the chaos, the young man realized something terrible. He sees his father crying in despair, wondering the reason for all of this. The truth is, the tragedy that had befallen them was only just beginning. The sword master who eliminated half the village had spared Arhan's parents. The mysterious man said he would return in 1 month to finish the job. And if they wanted to live, they would have to take everyone and leave before that deadline. The young master's father then asked why all of this was happening to them. In a cry of fury, he questioned what sin they had committed to deserve this. Even on his knees, the man continued to beg the invader for an answer. The white-haired warrior then replied coldly that he was just following orders. And with that simple sentence, he justified the entire tragedy he had committed there. After leaving behind those incomprehensible words, the man simply departed. After that, the surviving villagers began to gather one by one, frightened. With no other choice, the villagers began to abandon the village that was once their home. That might have been the only way to save their lives, but this choice was denied to the Lord's family. Crushed by the weight of duty, the young man's father raved, saying he was the guardian who protects the kingdom. He swore to the heavens that he would not abandon that place, as it was his duty as Lord. Arhan's mother appears and calls to him with a strange expression on her face. She says she has prepared a carriage for him to escape with the butler, as far away as possible. The young man then despairs and asks his parents to flee with him from that place. However, his mother explains that his father cannot leave, as he will face the enemy as the Lord of Caravan. And as a loyal wife, she affirms that she will stay by his side until the very last moment. The boy pleads tearfully, but his mother tells him he needs to remember one thing very well. She reveals that the stories about the family his father told were not true. Those titles of invincible guardians were nothing more than a story full of lies. With that in mind, she asks her son to promise her just one thing. She asks him to never pick up a sword again and to survive no matter what. Furthermore, the young man should not think of revenge and should live only for himself. At that moment, the butler arrives and announces that the carriage is ready for departure. The woman then asks the servant to take good care of her son and take him far away from that place. Heartbroken, the butler grabs the boy, who screams desperately for his mother. But she just watches with a sad expression as her son is taken away. The servant insists they must go while the young man cries and screams for his mother. Desperate, the young master reaches out his hand in a last attempt to reach her. With a sad smile, she says goodbye and tells him she loves him very much and always will. The scene then changes and the library door slowly opens, revealing what is inside. Inside, the young man's father is hurting himself, striking his head against the wall amidst scattered books. And he continues to harm himself. His face showed all the pain and despair he felt in that moment. His wife then hugs him from behind and asks him not to suffer alone anymore. She says that at least in their final moments, she will be by his side for better or for worse. Meanwhile, the carriage departs, taking Arhan far from his home and his family. The butler then says the young master must endure, because that man is a calamity. The servant compares him to a natural disaster, something far beyond the power of mere humans. He then advises that only by accepting this tragedy can the young man move on with his life. The servant believes his parents would surely want him to do just that. Suddenly, the butler is startled when he realizes the young master has jumped from the carriage. But the protagonist is determined not to run away and leave everything behind like that. He runs back because he cannot abandon his parents to face their end alone. In his mind, he can't be the only one to escape while everyone he loves is lost. That's why he shouts with all his might that he will not run from this fight. He believes that even sword masters are human and can be defeated with an arrow to the heart. To be sure, the young man also obtained a lethal poison during the last month. With this plan in mind, he believes he can finally protect his parents. However, upon arriving, he is met with a scene that leaves him completely paralyzed. In his eyes, we see the reflection of the tragedy that occurred in his absence. His father's head is now displayed on the family's flagpole. The invader then calls them all fools, while the young man's mother lies motionless on the ground. The invader then says the young man came here only to meet his own end. With a cold look, the mysterious man regrets having shown the boy mercy. Seeing his lifeless parents, the protagonist lets out a scream of pure hatred. His mother's body lay lifeless on the cold ground of that place. Blinded by fury, the young master aims his crossbow and shouts that he will put an end to the invader. But the white-haired warrior isn't even fazed by the boy's threat. In a flash, the protagonist sees an image of his own head being struck from his shoulders. The vision leaves the boy paralyzed. Suddenly, the protagonist drops his weapon and falls to his knees, strengthless. He looks at the invader, who remains standing without a single scratch. Then the boy places a hand on his neck. The mysterious man then reveals that the boy's age is what is saving him at that moment. He says he won't take the boy's life, and that he should sink into despair and fade away slowly. The invader warns that the will of the caravans must no longer exist on this continent, and if the young man tries to continue his family's legacy, he will return for him. And with that, the caravan family could simply vanish just like that. On his knees, the boy cries, feeling completely powerless before it all. Holding his mother, the young man feels utterly pathetic for not having been able to do anything. In his arms, he cries desperately, mourning the loss of his beloved mother. Unable to do anything, the young man reflects that on that day, he lost absolutely everything. But suddenly, a mysterious blue energy begins to emanate. This energy then envelops the family's sword, which begins to glow brightly. Or at least, that's what the protagonist believed until that very moment. A mysterious voice then orders our caravan to show proper respect, and his ancestor in the form of energy appears before him. His ancestor who calls him his descendant. A year has passed since everyone was laid to rest, and in that time, the young man has prepared for his revenge. The man who attacked him was known as the pinnacle of swordsmanship and the guardian who preserved the kingdom's peace. Moreover, he was seen as a righteous sentinel who eliminated evil and a talented superhuman. The name of the one who took everything from the young master was Carlos, the master of 10 swords. But everything was a mystery to the young man, who wondered why his family was attacked. He questioned who was behind it all and what secret was buried with the caravans. However, one thing was certain amidst all the doubts that surrounded him at that moment. The lives of all who were lost in vain would never return, and that was an unchangeable fact. Back in the present, the protagonist wonders what that apparition in front of him is. He then questions if he's gone crazy because of so many questions with no answers. At that moment, the mysterious voice demands that our caravan show the proper respect. Then the spirit reveals himself as his ancestor and calls the young man his descendant. The figure he believed to be just a lie appeared exactly as in the family portrait. The young man then remembers hearing about something like this before. He recalls that people who suffer a very strong mental shock can have visions. However, the feeling in his chest is so intense that he finds it impossible for it to be a hallucination. The ancestor then says that he can feel the boy's heart wavering with the situation. With a serious look, the spirit asks if the boy is afraid that he has truly lost his mind, or if the shock is from seeing the ancestor he considered a lie right in front of him. The young man then gathers his courage and asks if he is really the founder of his family. The spirit introduces himself as Liam Caravan, the strongest sword master in history. The young man then asks if he is the hero from his father's stories and why he has only appeared now. With great anger, the young master yells, asking the reason for his late appearance. His eyes burn with hatred as he demands to know why the ancestor waited until now. But Liam just observes his descendant's fury with a serene expression. He then reveals that he needed to confirm something, because revenge requires one to discard everything. The ancestor says that the boy never put down his sword, not even for a single day. And not for a moment did the protagonist's will for revenge diminish in his heart. The ancestor then says that the answer to the boy's question is actually quite simple. He appeared because the hatred in the boy's eyes finally reached the depth he desired, and also because own patience had reached its limit with the man who attacked his descendants. The intention to end that man burns intensely within the spirit. Then Liam reveals a truth that was denied only a sword master can defeat another. He says that the young man knows this, which is why he trained so hard and swore revenge. But the ancestor warns that no matter how much he trains, he will never reach his enemy alone. The spirit explains that a sword master is a being who transcends humanity. And among these masters, Carlos is at a height simply unreachable by others. Liam mentions that even in his time of war, warriors with such power were very rare. The ancestor claims that in the current era, no one in the world is capable of defeating that man. And as time passes, his enemy will only become even stronger and more powerful. The protagonist is in shock, but he knows the power difference between them is enormous. He wonders if it's impossible, and if he'll have to watch the man who took his family be hailed as a hero. In despair, he questions if he is destined to be powerless once again in the face of it all. But the ancestor states that from that moment on, everything will change because he will help him. Liam says he will help him so that he, as a caravan, can pass judgment on that fiend. The spirit then reveals that there is only one path that only the caravans can follow. With a serious expression, the ancestor orders the young man to devour his sword to become strong. The boy is confused as the spirit calls him a descendant who inherited the blood of steel. The scene then shifts to a room with various weapons and blades of all kinds. And then, the fire of a forge ignites with impressive intensity. A sword that was there begins to glow with the heat of the flames in that place. Liam explains that the caravan lineage carries both human and dwarven blood. With a sweaty face, the young master listens intently to his ancestor's words. Before the sword, the ancestor reveals that it all started with himself, as he is a half-dwarf. He then explains that the physical traits of dwarves do not appear in the descendants. However, through that blood, a special ability has been passed down from generation to generation. This ability allows them to absorb the memories of the former owner by consuming a sword. The young man finds it bizarre to gain power by eating swords, as he has never heard of such an ability. To him, it all sounds absurd and are just words that leave him even more confused. But Liam states that this is the source of power that allowed the caravans to become great swordsmen. The young man understands that truth is only proven with results, and he can no longer hesitate. With determination, he asks the ancestor to teach him how to consume a sword. Lime explains that the method is simple, just heat the blade until it softens. And with the hot sword, the young master just needs to chew and swallow it all. With sweat dripping down, the young man faces the challenge with a look full of determination. He thinks that even if he's in a nightmare under a spell, he won't give up. If there's the slightest chance of getting his revenge, he won't hesitate to do it. With a cry of fury, he opens his mouth and decides he will do it no matter what. The instant he bites the blade, he feels a terrible pain shooting through his entire body. His hand twists in pain as he struggles to endure the sword's intense heat. Engulfed in flames, he screams desperately, feeling an agony he never imagined. His face contorts into a mask of pure pain as he continues the painful process. Suddenly, he is thrown back by the explosion of energy released from the sword. With the force of the bite, the blade finally shatters into several pieces on the floor. He is then slammed against the wall with brutal force as he screams in pain. The young man feels his neck burning as if it were being torn from the inside. Tears of pain stream from his eyes, but he remembers what he needs to do. The protagonist continues the painful process with tears in his eyes but full of determination. With one last effort, he chews the fragments of the blade to absorb its power. The sword finally breaks into several pieces on the floor. Amidst the pain, he remembers the terrible night he lost everything and everyone he loved. The image of his lifeless mother in his arms returns to his mind with overwhelming force. And with that, he also recalls the face of the man who caused all that tragedy. With this memory in mind, his determination to continue becomes even stronger. Then the young man bites down harder on the sword fragments to finish what he started. Suddenly, the pain disappears, and he realizes he is not only alive but also without a scratch. He feels confused because the pain of chewing hot iron felt very real to him. The young master then wonders if it was all just a very strange dream. But Liam says that unlike his weak body, his mental strength is quite decent. The spirit of his ancestor then appears before him again. In a serious tone, the apparition calls the young man by his name to get his attention. The young man then kneels and greets the founder of his family with great respect. The scene then shifts to the family's old house on a quiet, sunny day. The boy promises that he will become a sword master even if it leads to his end, and he yells that he will become a swordsman strong enough to defeat that man. With that, the young man realizes that his ancestor is not a hallucination of his mind. Suddenly, the protagonist screams upon seeing something surprising on the floor right in front of him. Only the hilt of the sword remained, and if it were all a dream, that wouldn't be there. Liam then asks if he now believes that his father's legends are the purest truth. The spirit reveals that even some ancestors gave up because they couldn't bear the pain. The ancestor then tells the young descendant to call him master from that moment on. He explains that everyone who received his teachings did the same, and the young man agrees. The young master wonders if, with this, he has finally obtained the founder's great power. However, he notices that nothing has changed significantly and tells the spirit this. Liam then reveals that a problem has arisen, but that it is actually the young man's problem. The protagonist is confused by this and asks what the ancestor means by that. Suddenly, a blue sphere of energy appears on the young man's chest, surprising him. Seeing that, the boy says he understands the situation, and if the master says so, then it's true. The founder is surprised by the boy's calm reaction and questions if that's all. Arhan explains that he was already aware of his body's weakness, but the result is disappointing. But he is grateful that a different path exists for him to be able to absorb the power one day. With this, he deduces that he just needs to find a sword that fits his current level. The ancestor is very impressed with his descendant's intelligence and calmness. He then praises the young man, saying that his wisdom is already that of a true sword master. The spirit says that the more worn a weapon is from many hands, the better it will be for training. So he asks to be guided to a place with many old and worn-out weapons. Liam reveals that his original plan was to give him his own sword to make him a master instantly. But since the family's blood has weakened, the ability to digest the power has greatly diminished. He says that in his current state, it is impossible for him to digest the sword's essence completely. Amidst a battlefield, the ancestor says that he himself will make the selection of the weapons. The master comments that the place is full of dark energy and that sorcerers would like it there. The young man then explains that this is where all the old and useless things from the slums are discarded. With that, he says there is no better place to find the sword his ancestor described. Liam then reveals that in the beginning, he also devoured swords in places filled with the scent of battle. The spirit says that he ate and ate with all his might to get stronger, and he did it just to strengthen himself so he could survive amidst the chaos of war. With a nostalgic look, the ancestor says that this place reminds him a lot of those difficult times. He remembers the battlefields where things broke to protect the spark of life, where some passed on and others lived to fight another day on those terrible fields of war. Even though many lives were extinguished in the fight, someone always left behind a point of light. Suddenly, a single, dazzling point of light shines amidst all the wreckage of the place. With shining eyes, the master says with a smile that he has finally found what he was looking for. He then points to the glow and orders his young descendant to grab that object. That object was a simple, thin sword, the second one the young man needed to devour. The scene then changes, and we see some people walking towards a dark and empty mansion. One of them wonders if the mansion was used as a laboratory by some evil sorcerer. but another doubts it and says it's more likely the hideout of some bankrupt noble. With that, the group of 4 people enters the grand hall of that mysterious mansion. Back at the junkyard, we see swords of fallen soldiers and axes covered in mud and grime. A month passes, and back at the mansion, someone says there's no one around in the village. One of the intruders comments that the place has a strong scent of rich nobles. Another says that their luck has finally turned and that this job will be very easy. Suddenly, one of the men notices something strange in the corner of the room and is surprised. He then comments that the place seems to be the home of the daughter of some important noble. The intruder shows a pile of a girl's clothes that were neatly folded. With a strange smile, he sniffed the dress and says the scent of the fabric is different. The bald man then suggests that if they play their cards right, they can have a little fun. He licks his weapon with a nasty look, thinking about other things he could do. One of the others shouts, asking to sniff the dress and to look for a portrait of the girl. But suddenly, a mysterious voice orders them to stop that immediately. From the shadows, a figure emerges and slowly walks toward the group of intruders. He says that his mother was very fond of cleanliness and hated any kind of mess. Then he asks them to put the dress back in its place, as he would like to have a talk. The group's leader stares at the young man, not understanding anything that is happening there. One of them asks if the boy is the owner's son and is disappointed that it's not a girl. The young master questions if they came looking for food or just a place to stay. And he says that if it's one of those reasons, he is willing to accept them as his neighbors. The bald man gets angry and thinks the damn brat must have finally lost his mind. He then comments that these noble people really don't have an ounce of fear of danger. The leader then approaches and asks why he didn't just stay quiet instead of causing trouble. The protagonist stares at the intruder with a cold look and not a hint of fear on his face. In a fury, the bald man lunges at the young man, yelling if he really wants to end up there. But the young man's eyes glow with a mysterious energy, and an unknown power emerges. At that moment, an ancient and fierce power suddenly awakens within the young master's body. In a swift movement, he dodges the attack and strikes the intruder's neck with a single blow. The cut is deep, and red liquid begins to gush from the bald man's wound without stopping. Shocked, the man spits up as Arhan says they were just intruders there. And with a stained face, he coldly states that they were not guests in that house. The scene then changes, and we see the fire of a fireplace burning intensely in the darkness. Back in training, the young man calls his master while watching the flames of the forge. He then holds the thin sword and asks if this is really the one he needs to consume. The boy thinks the blade will break, and the master says that this is perfectly natural. Lime explains that this weapon was not made for cutting enemies or breaking things in general, but rather to pierce the enemy's vital point in a decisive battle to end it all. That was a sword made exclusively for thrusting, and nothing more after all. The young master is confused and wonders if the weapon is only for thrusting at the enemy. The ancestor then guesses that he is thinking a spear would be much better for that. With the thin blade in his hands, the young man thinks it looks more like a sewing needle. But the master says with a smile that this is a weapon made for a single purpose. And that purpose was to be a tool of assassination to eliminate targets with precision. The master says his doubt is not wrong, but for his weak body, the memories in the sword are useful. He then reveals, for his information, that the owner of that sword fought alone until the end of her life. With that weapon, she pierced the lives of more than 200 enemies without any outside help. And all of this was done by a woman with an even more slender body than the protagonists. The ancestor then explains that although the weight of the metal is light, there is something more important there. For within the blade is imbued a life much heavier and more solemn than anything else. At that moment, the scene changes, and a memory of the sword's former owner suddenly begins to emerge. The last thing the girl remembered was her mansion on fire with her family inside. After losing everything in an instant, the child went to live in an old local orphanage. And there, she discovered that the place worshipped the goddess of fire, which left her very shaken. The other children whispered about the mark on her face, saying it was a curse from the goddess. When the 10-year-old girl opened her eyes, many things around her had changed. She then thought that she should have also departed with her family on that tragic day. The girl felt that she still hadn't escaped the flames that took everything from her forever. Back in the present, the master says that by inheriting the woman's memories, he will gain many things. Then he orders the young man to show respect to the sword and consume it with much gratitude. The child's last memory was the sight of her home being consumed by the intense flames. Having lost everything, the girl ended up in an orphanage that worshipped the goddess of fire. And upon learning she had narrowly escaped, the child murmured softly amidst the flames of the place. The days that followed in that place were peacefully terrible for the young girl. The other children at the orphanage whispered that the mark on the girl's face was a curse. Because of this, she was called a monster and suffered from cruel words every day. But all that changed completely when a certain day finally arrived for the young woman. Looking back, she remembered that the man's swordsmanship was a bit rough and crude. His name was Hegel, an old swordsman who had worked at the orphanage for a long time. Normally, the girl would not have the courage to speak to a man with such a severe appearance as his. However, one night, she found him training alone in the forest near the orphanage. With courage, the young girl approached and asked how she could become like him one day. With the desire to learn, she finally took the first step to truly start living. The old swordsman just watched her in silence, without saying a single word about the request. He then said that learning to fight was not a useful thing for living, especially for a girl. Furthermore, the man stated that blades like that only serve to hurt oneself. But she insisted that if she could learn, she wouldn't care about the consequences. With her hands on her face, the young girl showed all her determination to the swordsman. The girl then began to train every day without rest to achieve her goal. She prayed to escape the fire that haunted her, the disgust she saw in others' eyes. Amidst all the suffering, the girl thought that what she really wanted was just to depart. But she felt that she wouldn't be afraid of any fire in the world if she could learn to fight. His blade dance was so beautiful that it made her forget for a moment the inferno in her mind. And so, the two began to train together in the forest under the moonlight. The swordsman tells the girl to choose any weapon, and if she can swing it, he will teach her. The young girl then looks at the swords in front of her, not knowing what to do at that moment. She then asks if she really needs to swing the weapon, and the man questions what she would do. With her finger, she points as if she were piercing something, showing her intention to the master. Then the girl picks up the thin sword and says that as long as she can fight back, that's enough. In the memory, we see her pointing the blade at her master's throat with precision. The swordsman stares at the tip of the weapon with a serious expression, surprised by her action. With a determined smile, the young girl says that any weapon will do for what she needs to do. Back in the present, the young man's face becomes stained as he says that was his first strike. The leader of the intruders stumbles back in shock, unable to believe what happened to him. Then the man falls to the floor lifeless as the young master watches him with a cold gaze. The protagonist faces the other three intruders remaining in the mansion's grand hall. The man's companions are completely terrified by the scene they have just witnessed. One of them then asks what that was, and if the boy is just toying with them. The young man says there's no more need for talk and lunges at the other intruders. The spirit of Liam watches everything from a distance with a calm and serene expression. The ancestor then reveals that during the last month, he taught his descendant only one thing. A flashback shows the young man doing only physical training so he wouldn't get tired in battle. Liam explains that he didn't teach the boy any swordsmanship techniques during that time. And yet, a strike like that means he is digesting the power of the sword. The master then tells the young man to show his first step as a true caravan. With the sword in hand, the young master faces the enemies with a look full of determination. He thinks that the place where the intruder was pierced was a very specific point of the body. The blow struck precisely between the man's ribs, piercing his lungs completely. Someone like him, with no skill or experience, could never land such a precise strike. And there was only one reason that had been possible: the owner of the sword he consumed. From that day on, Hegel taught her many important things for her life's journey. He taught her how to fight and even how to survive in such a cruel world. Although it wasn't a formalized theory, Hegel's swordsmanship carried something special. It had the romance and freedom of a lifetime of wandering as a knight. With a smile, the girl reflects on how she truly loved those teachings. And she truly loved her master's sword and everything it represented to her. Some years later, the old swordsman was on his final bed at the orphanage. He asks that when the day comes, she leave that place and see the world outside. With his last strength, he says that this was his final lesson for the young girl. And he says goodbye, saying he is happy that his journey ended by her side. With tears in her eyes, the girl holds her master's hand in a final farewell. These were the memories of Mary, the former owner of the sword the protagonist consumed. The swordsmanship of an old knight for a girl who feared fire was something special, for it embodied a strength that was breathtakingly beautiful to anyone. The girl thanks him for everything and says goodbye to her master, wishing him to rest in peace. After that, as Hegel's final lesson taught, she left the orphanage to see the world. She wonders if it was because of her thin sword, or because she was a young woman in a rare job. But for some reason, people began to call her by a very specific name back then. Because of her fighting style, she became known to everyone as the seamstress gypsy. With this, the young man finally understands what his master meant by the word digestion. Her memories then flow into his mind and speak to him in a very clear way. One of the intruders on the floor desperately begs for his life to be spared. The young master grips the hilt of his sword firmly as he faces the wounded man. Kneeling, he thinks that this is the first time he has taken someone's life. However, despite it being his first time, no emotion arises in his heart at that moment. All he can see now is the situation in front of him, and nothing else matters to him. He reflects that he was only able to exploit an opening because the man underestimated him in the fight. But now outnumbered, he can't expect to have the same luck again with the others. The ancestor then says that they're terrified by what they just witnessed there. And he explains that the move the young man showed was not that of a beginner in the sword arts. In a short time, she made a name for herself as a well-known mercenary for her skills. The protagonist then lunges at another intruder and pierces his chest with the thin blade. Mary's memory then asks him to make sure to finish the job once and for all. The other intruders are paralyzed with fear and do not advance, even with the numerical advantage. The ancestor says that a little fear helps, but too much hinders men's judgment. While the intruders hesitate, the protagonist becomes the embodiment of battle itself. With a smile, he says that since it's like this, he will seize the opportunity that has arisen. He then throws the thin sword, which sticks into the ground to draw everyone's attention. The young master says that now is the perfect time to finally end all of this. Terrified, one of the men yells for him not to come any closer to that place at all. And he then questions if the young man is really going to end all of their lives there. Angrily, one of the intruders lunges at the boy to try one last desperate attack. But the protagonist dodges the blow with ease as the man curses him with great hatred. With a confident look, he prepares for his next attack move in the fight. The intruder can hardly believe the young master's speed and skill in combat. At that moment, he remembers a teaching that Higo once gave him in the past. The last intruder screams and runs towards him in a final desperate attempt to win. He swings his weapon with all his might, but the young man is already prepared for what comes next. The young master then dodges the attack by ducking at the last possible second in the fight. Mary's memory reveals that as a woman without strength, time was never on her side. That's why, on the first or at most the second strike, she needed to end the fight for good. The master explains that fear makes the enemy think you are stronger than you really are. With a swift movement, the young man strikes another intruder's back with his thin blade. He then pierces the man with the mustache's neck, ending the fight once and for all. The last intruder can't believe what just happened right in front of him. With a cry of fury, the young man pierces the last man's chest with his thin sword. In the memories, the girl prepares for the attack while her enemy glares at her with hatred. Her strength came from her flexibility and her agile body, like that of a dancer. And because of that, she could attack from any posture and from any possible angle. The enemy's eye trembles with fear upon realizing the young swordswoman's skill in battle. The man then spits up as his eye is pierced by the girl's thin blade. Back in the present, the protagonist observes the body of the last intruder lying on the floor. Terrified, the last survivor cannot believe what happened to his friends. Trembling with fear, he grips his knife tightly, not knowing what to do in that situation. He wonders what that fiend in front of him is, who defeated everyone so easily. The scene then shifts to a dark forest under the moonlight on a quiet night. The protagonist trains tirelessly to hone his combat skills with the sword. The master then asks if he can finally put his doubts about the power aside now. The ancestor says that if he has the stamina to fight all day, he can improve a lot. Hijul advised the girl not to try to compensate for what she lacks in her skills. Instead, he taught her to make what she already had shine to win. The young woman then used her agility to dodge attacks and find an opening in the fight. In a swift movement, she would then pierce her enemy's vital line to win. With this, she was able to defeat opponents much stronger and more experienced than her in battle. The ancestor says he can easily handle 4 unprepared bandits on his own. With a smile, the master reflects on the struggle for life amidst a great trial for the caravans. The young master then admits that everything his ancestors said was the purest truth. His body became as flexible as a dancer's and Mary's memories became more vivid. With this, the young man began to understand a little better the power he had acquired from the sword. He could feel with what kind of heart that woman fought against the world on her journey. The protagonist then asks if this was what the master meant about the power of digestion. The sword glows and the power of digestion makes him stronger by better understanding his opponents. The spirit then states that he never lies when it comes to swords and their abilities. He warns that his days will be full of pain and hardship, or departure would be a blessing. The founder then questions if he can still walk that difficult path. But the young man says that if he can put his sword to Carlos's throat, he will press on. With determination, he yells to his master that he will advance no matter what happens. Suddenly, he realizes he is alone and despairs as he calls out for his ancestor. Panting and exhausted, the young man wonders if this path of training is the right one. He is then seen climbing a steep cliff while questioning the direction of his training. The scene shows the vastness of the mountain he needs to climb to become stronger. Breathless, he wonders if this is really what he needs to do for his revenge. The ancestor then taunts him, asking where all his determination from the previous night is gone. With a smile, the master says that this doubt of his has also been one of his strengths since childhood. The master then says he will answer his question and explains that the path of the swordsman has 5 stages. The first is the beginner, and the most talented reach the level of sword wanderer. Then comes the sword runner, who are the pillars on the kingdom's battlefields. And above them all are the experts, who are revered like true gods. The scene shows an army of knights revering the power of a great master. The final stage is the sword master, and the ancestor asks where the young man thinks he is. Clinging to the cliff, the young descendant looks exhausted by his master's question. With a smile, he says he knows very well what his current power level is. The young man explains that the prerequisite to be a sword master is to have a mana heart. And since he doesn't have one, he doesn't even qualify as a simple beginner. The spirit smiles and confirms that he is not even at the entrance of the sword path yet. He says the young man is a novice, and the training is to create his mana heart to begin. The protagonist is completely shocked by his ancestor's revelation there. He then yells and asks if he really needs to take this risk to form his heart. Desperate, he questions if he needs to do this in a place where he could really pass on. The young master complains that nowadays you just need to drink an alchemist's potion to awaken, or have a wanderer-class knight infuse mana to form the mana heart. He says that even nobles who learn self-defense can easily form a heart. Clinging to the rock, he asks why they need to ignore such an easy and simple path. With his face against the cliff, he says he simply cannot understand the reason. The master agrees that forming a mana heart is not difficult using normal methods. But he explains that the blood of the caravans carries the power of steel, and so it needs a strong body. The ancestor says that an ordinary person's body won't do, and the realm one reaches is only human. And if the young man truly wants to reach the path of the sword master, he needs one thing. That thing is a heart of steel that doesn't get scratched even when it clashes with the world. The spirit then reveals that there is only one way to forge such a powerful heart. He must push himself to the limit of departure until his body demands a mana heart. The founder says that even among his descendants, few completed this training. This is because the process was very painful and terrible to endure until the very end. However, those who endured the entire training to the end became sword masters. So he asks his young descendant if he is motivated to continue now. The young man grips the rock tighter, showing his renewed determination to the master. With a smile, he says he is more than motivated to continue the hard training. The ancestor smiles and states that he never lies when it comes to the sword and its power. With a look full of confidence, the young master says the heart he creates will be different. And that heart will be unlike anyone else's in this entire vast world. The scene then shifts to a full moon night in a village far from the kingdom's capital. In the Verdi region, in the eastern village of Campbell, the nightlife seems quite lively. In a tavern, a man asks if the others have heard the rumor about the western village. Another replies that it's the place where no one has been seen for a year, and there's something strange there. The man then asks what that thing is, and the other says he doesn't know, but it's something dangerous. He says that every bandit who has set foot in that village has simply vanished without a trace. The rumor says that a wave of monsters swept through the place or a dark mage is conducting experiments. But despite all the stories, the conclusion is always the same: do not enter the western village. A mysterious masked man listens intently to the conversation at the next table in the tavern. With a drink in his hand, he reflects on a village where everyone who enters ends up gone. He then takes a sip of his drink with a serious and thoughtful look about the rumors. With a sinister smile, he says that place will serve his plans very well.